on the 4th of July, 1876, a black militia company, in other words, armed black men led by a gentleman named Doc Adams, decided to march through town. Okay? Now, Doc Adams was the black commander of the Hamburg Militia Company in Aiken County, South Carolina. Hamburg was a majority black Reconstruction town. It was right across from the Savannah River, in near Augusta, Georgia. Think about the symbolism of that. I want you to picture this. You have formerly enslaved black men wearing uniforms, carrying weapons, marching in public on the 4th of July, celebrating American freedom in a town. It was like a parade, right? In a town where black people were trying to live and be free. And that sight just enraged white men who believed black people had no right to stand up like citizens. In other words, they believed that black people had no right to defend themselves or even pretend to defend themselves. I want you to remember that concept. Nevertheless, you had two white men, one named Thomas Butler and another one named Henry Gitson. Now, as the parade was going on, these two white men demanded to cut through the militia formation, basically just walk all through it. And guess what that led? That just was an excuse for a confrontation. So you got all these black men with guns marching in formation in what is basically a parade. And you got two white men who just want to cut through. They want to just pass on the road. But you know, the real issue was that you had armed black men organized, black men voting, politically active black men. And that scared the hell out of the white power structure. So anyway, a few days later, by July 8th, 1876, you had more than 100 armed white men came to Hamburg. And these weren't people trying to calm things down. These were white supremacist political terrorists. And they surrounded the black militia members. They demanded their weapons. They wanted to humiliate them. They wanted them to surrender. They wanted to send a message that black men couldn't organize, were not allowed to defend themselves, and couldn't march, couldn't vote, and couldn't act like equal citizens in South Carolina. And a fight ensued. The black militia members took cover. They were outnumbered. The white mob brought overwhelming force, and the situation turned into a slaughter. After the Hamburg massacre, 94 white men were indicted for murder. 94 white men. Can you imagine that? 94 white men were indicted for murder. And among those names were some very powerful white men who were not treated like criminals. They were treated like respectable citizens afterward. They weren't put in handcuffs. This is the area that this situation happened in. Somebody type FBA in the chat room. One of the gentlemen, his name was Matthew Calbraith Butler. He was a former Confederate general and a lawyer. Now, during the Hamburg confrontation, he showed up as a private lawyer to represent the angry group of white men and stood out there and demanded that the militia disband and turn over their weapons. Now, I want you to understand something. Matthew Butler had no lawful authority to command anybody, especially the black militia, to surrender their guns to him personally. He was a private citizen. But yet he stood in front of this white mob and demanded the black militia to disarm themselves. And he was indicted. But he wasn't punished for murder. Actually, he went on to become the United States Senator for South Carolina from 1877 to 1895. Think about that. And that's the point. Even today, South Carolina still honors this man inside the State House. In the Senate gallery, there's a portrait of Matthew C. Butler honoring him as a South Carolina House member, a United States Senator from 1876 to 1897, and a Confederate general, and later a major in the United States Army during the war against Spain. So he wasn't punished, he was upgraded. Now here's another one for you. You got Benjamin Ryan Tillman, Pitchfork Ben. Somebody type Pitchfork Ben in the chat room. This man was openly racist, violent white supremacist, a politician, one of the most violent, open racist white supremacists in South Carolina history. He became the governor. Think about that. This man became the governor of South Carolina from 1890 to 1894, and then went on to become a senator in the United States Senate from 1895 to 1918. This Pitchfork Ben helped push the 1895 South Carolina Constitution that literally crushed black voting power for generations. And he wasn't the only one. These are the people who participated in this massacre. Another gentleman, A.P. Butler, another prominent white man in connection with this same incident. They identified Colonel A.P. Butler. He became a South Carolina senator in Aiken County in 1877. But see, the point is that this tells you exactly how this system worked. Black blood could be spilled in public, and the legal system still would look away. So when black people in South Carolina talk about distrust of courts and prosecutors and law enforcement and jury verdicts, that leave black families with no justice. This is part of what we're talking about. That law could see the crime, name the criminals, and still refuse to punish them. And that kind of history doesn't disappear. It gets passed down. It becomes memory. It becomes the feeling black people have when the system says, trust us. And history says, why would we? And see, that's the backdrop. That's why black people don't look at these cases like isolated courtroom events. When a black child is accused, chased, and shot in the back, and then the shooter walks free, black people aren't just reacting to one verdict. They're reacting with historical memory. They're reacting from a place where accusations against black people have always been dangerous and oftentimes false. And today, when a black child is accused of stealing water in a heavily black community and ends up dead, people hear echoes of the same old pattern. Black suspicion, black pursuit, black death, and then a legal system that finds a way to explain it away. And that's why the black community is outraged right now. That's why they're talking about boycotting Asian businesses.